Hello and welcome to another video out of our resistance playthrough, and I have done this later, or I went back on one of my save games from the campaign because based on feedback and also on my own thoughts, I thought that I should make a video about the investment priorities here and go into that a bit more detailed because I only scratched the surface while explaining what I do or what I did in the campaign so far. And so the moment I went back to the save game is around when we reached Mars and reached Moon and went to Mars. So it's a few episodes in, and now I'm going back on the save game here just to showcase and explain what to keep an eye on when you take out over a nation and what is very important to know if you, for example, decide what kind of nations to take. And so let's start with the basics, which I touched already. So you do have the values here, which are the most important ones, because you get investment points, you get money, you get science, you get boost, and you get mission control out of a nation. You can see here that these are 0 because Canada doesn't have a space program, but if you go to the US, you see that they are producing boost and mission control here. But every nation produces a bit of investment points and science. Sometimes they also produce a bit of money for your organization, in this case, resistance. And let's start with the investment points here. They are dependent on the economy and the total economy in your nation. So the GDP over here, the total GDP, is what determines how many investment points you have. And this total GDP is of course derived from your per capita GDP and the total population that you have. And the only way to increase your points is by either integrating more nations into this nation or by investing into the economy priority. I can say right from the get-go, this is usually not efficient at the early game, except if you, for example, want to modernize China and India further, or some other small nations like Indonesia later, where you want to pull them further up and get more investment points. For example, China can go from 37, 34 up to 50 relatively easily. India here as well. But for example, in America or Canada, investments into economy will not do much because we are already relatively rich. Now, the money value is completely dependent on how much funding has, for example, been invested here. And this is therefore usually relatively low. And the only one which a considerable funding income is, for example, the US and some nations here in Europe. So you can more or less ignore that value for the most part. Science is again dependent on the economy, so the total, or rather the GDP per capita plays a role, the education score plays a major role, and also the cohesion plays a major role. If the cohesion is around 5, you have more knowledge, more science output than, for example, if you were at 0 or at 10, which are the extremes of that value. And therefore, the best way to boost your science output is to increase your education score and to a minor degree the per capita GDP. But the most important factor is actually the population amount later on. So bigger nations will make more science if they have a high knowledge or education here. And therefore, large nations like China and India can produce a lot of science if you invest into it via the knowledge priority, which is increasing the education score. So for example, China here is still at 6.8 compared to the US, which is at 8.8. This is a very big difference. The science would almost double for China if it goes to 8.8 right away. And so these are the most important ones. Boost and mission control will be delivered by the boost and mission priority here by investing into this. And every 25 investment points, you get 1 mission control, which you can basically use to control 1 ship or half a base on, for example, Luna or the Mars. And boost is the resource that you need to get into space from the get-go. I can say that you want to probably reach like 10 to 15 boost income relatively early to get to Mars and Moon relatively quick. So you will, depending on where you start, if you take the US, you already get 8. So you don't need to do that much. If you start with something smaller, let's say you start in Europe, then you will need a lot of boost investment to get into the space game. Same here for India and to a lesser degree for China. And yeah, so these are completely dependent on what you do here in the investment priorities. And now let's talk about those ones from the top to the bottom. The economic priority will increase your per capita GDP. So the changes or investments in economy will therefore depend on your population as well, and therefore how much will your total GDP go up, which influences the investment points you get, which is roughly capped. You will never get higher than 50 to 60. So that's really only achievable for India and China. The economy has a downside. It will produce inequality, which is this one here. Inequality will only go down if you invest into welfare. So where you have to redistribute the wealth in your nation, and it's very much a sink of investment points early on. You will not get any benefits out of that except for a slightly more stable nation, which is maybe not the most important thing considering you are getting hit with an alien invasion. Environment score will help reducing the environmental impacts of your nation, like how much gases does it produce and put into the atmosphere. It's something you can also ignore early on because it's not a priority in face of an alien invasion most of the time. And it's more like a nice to have go that you maybe also transform the economies of Earth to a better situation if you want to, but you don't need to. You can win with a really terrible economy or real terrible environmental score. You can scorch the earth more or less to just win the fight. So welfare and environment definitely are investment sinks early on where you don't get much in return, if at all. Knowledge will increase the education score and will pull you towards cohesion 5. So if you are below or above 5, it will slowly pull you towards that. However, important is where is your cohesion rest value. If we check this tooltip here, at the top it says that the cohesion rest value is 0.095 for the US, so basically 0. So it will decay naturally to 0, and you would therefore fight with the knowledge priority against that natural decay, which is also a good thing because you don't want to be at 0 cohesion because then your nation starts to fall apart. Knowledge is a long-term investment, more or less, because the knowledge or science output gains are relatively slow, but it still be one of the main priorities you will do early on outside of boost and mission control because of the increased science output, and science is important to reach your goals for space, but also to get better ship designs, for example. Government will increase the democracy score or the government score here. Higher government scores will mean more knowledge, more education, more research, more whatever, less corruption and so on. It's a decent score. On long term, you maybe want to have a high one, but you can also just work towards 0. It's totally fine. So you can go to pretty low values, which makes your nation more stable, but decreases your science output in return. And then you have unity. This is also very similar to knowledge. It's pulling you towards 5 cohesion, but it will also give you public opinion in the nation if you do this. So unity will help you to get more public opinion, which will help getting the cohesion rest value up, and it will also give you cohesion per investment point, more or less. The thing is that unity will decrease no education a tiny bit, and so most of the time, if your cohesion rest value is close to 5, you will want to run knowledge instead, because it will get you also to cohesion 5, but slower, and it's still probably preferable because you get more science in return as well. And unity does the opposite more or less. Oppression will reduce unrest and will give you a lot of negatives like cohesion and government losses. Funding will give you money. It's very, very inefficient. Do not do this early on. Spoils will basically plunder the nation to give you money. A lot of money. You will do that from time to time. It will terribly destroy your sustainability environmental score. It will also destroy your government and inequality score. So don't do this for too long, else the nation is screwed over and could fall apart. But early on you will need money, and that's the only way to get it quickly. So ideally you pick a nation like Canada. What I'm doing here is a stable nation which can take the hit for a while. So you plunder it for a bit to get yourself going faster. Boost emission control, as already mentioned, influence these two values here. They are depending on that. Military is the technology level. Currently the US is at Environment Information Age 4.5. Doing military investments will increase this score, therefore make your armies better than those of the remaining world. If we look at all nations and sort them by military score here, we can see that the US is leading. And then you have things like Japan, Germany, United Kingdom, France, and so on. This will be relevant over time if the aliens start landing an invasion force on Earth, maybe later. Spoiler alert. Then you will need a good military to defeat them. So that's something you maybe want to invest into later. Armies. Build army is pretty obvious. You will get another army that you can control on the map here to invade and take over stuff. And I think I don't need to mention nuclear here. What it will do is pretty obvious. You have these weapons available, which I would only recommend to use in emergency situations, for example in an invasion situation. Because this will not only shredder the province that you fired on, or the state, it will also pretty much disrupt the global economy, so everybody will take a loss here. It will destroy population. It will shredder your public opinion because nobody likes that you use them. And there are many other environmental effects on the provinces where it is used. So population loss will not only be instant, it will also be constant afterwards because of the nuclear wasteland you create. But maybe you will run into a situation where nothing else is possible anymore. And these are the main investment priorities. So just to highlight the most important ones early on: getting a space program, getting boost and mission control, getting spoils for money for your faction, and then it's probably knowledge, unity, government, welfare, which you want to keep an eye on, depending what you need to do in your nation. For example, the main struggle with the United States start is keeping it stable. Cohesion is terrible. You need to fix that. You can either fix that by reducing inequality, so you have to invest into welfare. You can declare wars, you can invest into knowledge and unity to push your public opinion up and therefore get higher rest values. There are multiple ways how you can fix the US, but you will have to use one of those. I talk in the episodes about that. What I would recommend is a mixture of many things, like using wars to keep the cohesion values further up, and also do knowledge, welfare, unity to get a bit of a mixed bag of everything, so that you can well steer the nation better to the unrest and chaos coming with the aliens. Now, the investment points you have here will get spread out depending on where you put your points here. So for example, we have put everything in spoils in Canada. US is doing a wild mix of everything. Mexico we are spoiling right now as well because we want the money to buy organizations to our counselors to support them, make them better. But there is also an efficiency value behind this. There is a percentage value that we can see here. How much bonus do you get towards certain investments? And these are also shown in the tooltip. If you hover over the priorities here, it will tell you what you get. First of all, there is like a distribution bonus, so that if you spread things out, you get a bit of a reward for that. It's a tiny amount, like a few %, but it's still a bonus for spreading out stuff. So you don't do like here, one and only. Here you would get everything. If you do multiple priorities, you get a bit of a bonus for that. The other bonuses you can get are from organizations that you have on your counselors here. I think we have the science orgs here, these ones. For example, this one gives you plus 2% mission control efficiency. So if we invest 100 points into mission control over time, we would get 102 because of that org. It will get us a tiny bonus here. And these you can stack over time. So most of them will, or many of them will have a bonus towards certain things. Of course, the ones we have here do not have anything, but that's what you can find on orgs. What you also can make later on are space stations that will give you these kind of things. So we already have a project like the Military Science Lab or Information Science Lab. This one will give you, for each lab that you have in orbit of Earth, you will get 3% bonus to your investments into knowledge. That's pretty powerful, because if you have 10 of these modules in Earth orbit and you invest 100 points into knowledge, you get a 130. So that's a very big difference over time. Because, well, if we would invest everything into knowledge, that would be around 27. And so within just getting 30% on top of that, it's quite a lot. So you will want to get a space infrastructure going to boost up your investment priorities here as well. And you should think about like, okay, what do I need really urgently? So for example, the Information Science Lab is useful to buff up the knowledge investment to get more science that way. They will also give you a tiny bit of science themselves, +5 here in this case. And they will also give you a little bit of a percentage in science, which I talked about when talking about research. That comes in play how much gets invested into these categories depending on your percentages and bonuses and so on. And in regards to the bonuses that you can stack here, the highest ones you can expect are for the boost priority here. But boost is only important early on, and later on it's one of the least important resources compared to space resources like water and metals. And then it's mission control and money, which most of the time will make you struggle later. And you ideally don't want to use your Earth nations to produce money, because spoiling is very bad and funding is very inefficient. You instead want to use your space infrastructure to produce resources that you can sell or make into money directly, for example, via nanofactories. I talk about that when they come up. And instead you want to use your investment points to either produce more science or make mission control, so that you can get more stations in space, therefore make more resources, therefore make more money. There's also the direct investment button here, where you could support your nation, but this is very, very expensive. The only cases where you maybe use this later is for funding, for mission control, and maybe something like an army if you are really desperate. But as you can see here, 1 knowledge point would cost us 3.4k money and almost 400 influence just for 1 point. That's not worth it, not at all. But that will get cheaper over time. It also depends if you control the nation, so everything here is a lot cheaper in Canada because I own it. And there are also technologies that you can research to decrease these investment values. And maybe you have too much money later or too much influence, then you could, for example, consider investing into funding a few points, or invest into something like knowledge or economy, just a few points, just to get rid of your resources later. But that's very unlikely to happen in the next 10 years here. And with that, this is more or less the overview here. And what I, for example, would recommend if you are now playing the US or something like that, you would put points into mission control, a bit of knowledge, a bit of unity, and that's more or less it. You don't invest into economy a lot. Maybe in a few years you start boosting up economy again, a tiny fraction, like 3-4 points here, just to get like 10% economy investment or something. But that's something that will come up, and you can watch me do that in my playthrough here, and I will talk about that in detail, why I make certain decisions. But to understand how the investment works, I think the most important thing to note is the investment values will not change very quickly, so accept them and think about what you can do with them. And keep the unrest low, because high unrest reduces investments. So if you have high unrest like here, it will reduce your investment points here by, in this case, 39%, because it's just too unruly to be governed properly. But the US, for example, is at 2, that's fine, and Canada is at 0, that's best. And these kind of things you have to keep an eye on, and then you just think about, okay, what do I want to do with these points? And in most cases, space is the answer, because there is the future, and you want mission control, you want boost, and you want to get into space as quickly as possible. And when that has been done, you got your foothold in Mars and on the moon, then you can, for example, further knowledge, further unity, further government, do economy, do welfare, more mission control, and so on, and slowly develop your nation as you want them. And also it's noteworthy as a last point here, you cannot have unlimited amounts of mission control in a nation. For example, the US can have a maximum of 104, which is a lot, but Canada, for example, can only have 14. So 25 per mission control, we make 15. If we were to invest all of that into mission control, well, we would hit the limit within a few years. That's very likely to happen very soon for us here. Same for example for Mexico when we do this, but America can invest into that for a very, very long time. But even if we were to invest everything the US has, which is 27 investment points, into that, we would see that they would do more than 1 per month. So in about 100 months, we would be maxed out, which is less than 10 years. So even them will max out relatively quickly. And with that, I think this chapter is also done. So just watch me what I do and make your own decisions. What kind of things do you want to prioritize in your nations? It heavily depends on what kind of nation you play. If you play US, you can do what I do, which is mostly going for mission control. If you play India or China or something else, you have to really think about how do I want to build it up long term, because economy investments can be worthwhile. For example, if you invest into economy for the first 2 years relatively heavily, then you can more or less double your investment points here or even triple them as India. And that's of course a consideration you should take. And that's a decision you have to make. And with that, let's get back into the main campaign.